All right, returning to our breaking news now from the United Kingdom. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the younger brother of the British King, has been arrested by police on suspicion of misconduct whilst in public office. We understand several police officers arrived at his residence earlier this morning. For more on this developing story, we're going to go now to Milena Veselinovic, who joins us from London. Milena, have we got you there? And can I ask you, what is the background to this story about the reports the police have arrested Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor?
Well, we know that the police were investigating the former Prince Andrew, now known as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, on allegations of misconduct in public office, allegations that he had forwarded confidential information that he obtained as part of his job as Britain's trade envoy onto the late disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. And we also know that a number of police forces around the UK were investigating Andrew for a number of allegations as well. Now, he was arrested around 8 o'clock this morning, and it all goes back to his handling of these confidential memos in the latest release of information from the US authorities. It is shown that Andrew, as part of his job as Britain's trade envoy, would receive reports, and some of them confidential, about the visits and the trips that he would undertake in his official capacity, that he would then forward onto Jeffrey Epstein. And one of those emails clearly shows the word confidential within it. Andrew himself saying to Jeffrey Epstein that he wanted to hear his views about the investment opportunities in Helmand province in Afghanistan that at the time the UK taxpayers were funding the reconstruction of. And within this email, it says that it is a confidential memo. Now, all of that came out in that latest batch of emails released by the US Department of Justice. It caused huge shockwaves here, and we've even heard from the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer this morning when he was questioned about it, saying that no one is above the law. And we also know the UK's National Crime Agency is involved in this. But this is such an unprecedented action and move. A former prince who was at one time the late Queen's favourite child, who held a number of high-profile roles within the British establishment, who gradually has had this descent, this fall from grace, because of his associations with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Now, he has been stripped of his royal titles by his older brother, King Charles, last year, and he's also been forced to move out of his former grace and favour home on the Windsor estate, the Royal Lodge, to Sandringham, which is another of the King's properties from where he was arrested, we understand, this morning. And this is yet another blow to really the branding of the monarchy. Now, it's important to say that the King and the Queen had released a statement just last week saying that if asked, they will cooperate with the police on this investigation, referring to Andrew simply as Mr. Mountbatten-Windsor, really trying to put some distance there between him and the rest of the royal family. But truly, this is an unprecedented move in modern British history, and we are reaching out to Buckingham Palace for more comment.
Yeah, Milena, you've got to think at some point they may be forced to make some comment. This is, of course, important for our viewers who've been following this story. There have been a number of discoveries with the release of those documents relating to Jeffrey Epstein. And as an important distinction, there have been a number of allegations about sex trafficking of young women and abuse of young women, and that former Prince Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, was involved with Jeffrey Epstein in a very personal friendship capacity. But these allegations specifically relate to that trade envoy role and the business dealings and the communications that appear to have been passed on, sometimes within minutes, wasn't it, from his staff member to Jeffrey Epstein over a number of years. And certainly it raises questions when Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has made claims about when his relationship or friendship with Epstein was or was not present, about whether that was an accurate representation of his friendship with him.
Indeed. I mean, I think it's important to say that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has in the past denied all allegations. But it is also clear from this release of this latest batch of documents that a lot of the things that he'd been saying about when he cut off contact with Jeffrey Epstein simply weren't true. He said that he had last spoken to Jeffrey Epstein when he went to visit him in New York in 2010. This was after Jeffrey Epstein's conviction on child sex offences, that he'd gone there to break off relations. But with this latest batch of emails, it's clear that he stayed in very close and intimate contact with him for much, much longer. In fact, there are damning emails that show that within days of Jeffrey Epstein being released from custody, Andrew emailed him saying congratulations, saying he wanted to celebrate his new life with him, even asking what is freedom like? What does freedom feel like? Now, that goes absolutely against everything that Andrew had been saying in public in terms of the nature of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, there had been a number of allegations from the late Virginia Giuffre, who said that she had been trafficked to Prince Andrew, then known as Prince, on 3 occasions, allegations that he had denied, but he did settle a large civil suit with her to the tune of about £10 million, which is something like $13–14 million, without admitting liability. And there was also some questions there about who paid for that. So this is certainly a criminal case for Andrew to answer, but there are also wider questions for the royal family, because this association of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor with Jeffrey Epstein, it was happening while he was a prince. It was happening while he had an official role within the UK government as Britain's trade envoy. There were news articles about it for a number of years, for the last 15 years at least. And from the majority of that time, Andrew was embraced as part of the royal family, undergoing official duties. And it's only in the last year or so that really the royal family have made a concerted effort to distance themselves from him, saying that the victims are what matters. Again, we have to always reiterate that Andrew does deny allegations, but he has been arrested, and there is some evidence, certainly, that, as you said, the confidential information that he would receive from the British government to do with his official business, he would forward on to Jeffrey Epstein literally within minutes of receiving it. And that is, at the moment, what the police is looking at in terms of his arrest. But there are other investigations to do with trafficking of women that are ongoing as well.
In terms of the fallout and the response, you referred to the royal family and what will happen from here, Milena, because when we look at, you mentioned, Andrew was once the favourite son. I don't think there was any secret about that, of the Queen, and his position in the family was well protected, even after these allegations started coming out. And, as you mentioned, the royal family itself has only really started to communicate on this issue and these allegations within the last year under King Charles. The statement from October last year saying these censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding, that was the removal of titles and the moving to private accommodation, notwithstanding the fact that Andrew continues to deny the allegations against him. But you've got to think that as these allegations continue to come out, this has been a very long-standing issue now of multiple links to Epstein over a number of years, over a number of issues, that the royal family is continuing to deal with the fallout, not just with Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, but also his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson.
Indeed, and when it comes to her, there is also a number of very embarrassing things that have come out with this release of emails, where it does certainly seem like Jeffrey Epstein had been paying off the debts of Andrew's ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, and it does show that she brought her young daughters, who were teenagers at the time, to Miami to have lunch with Jeffrey Epstein days after he'd been released from custody, serving a sentence on child sex offences. And that was also a trip that Jeffrey Epstein paid for himself. Those are all incredibly embarrassing things to come out for the royal family, and they really are overshadowing everything that they do at the moment. You know, King Charles is trying to keep the focus on the charitable work that he's doing, but he has been heckled a number of times during public engagements in the last few weeks, and that's really unheard of. People have been shouting, asking, how long have you known about Epstein? Will you make Andrew testify? Now, he had not responded to that during those particular engagements. He's trying to keep the focus on the good work that the royal family is doing, but it does feel like that screen has slightly shattered that kind of mysterious sort of air of mystery that always envelops the royal family, because we, by the release of these emails, have been able to peer into the dealings of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, and a lot of it just simply doesn't look good. And there have also been allegations that the palace, the king, have been quite slow to react to this. Now, there's been a statement by the king and queen saying that they will cooperate with the police if they're asked, saying that they always put victims first. There was also a statement from the Prince and Princess of Wales saying they're really concerned about what they said were continuing revelations about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, again saying the victims are at the forefront of their minds. But a lot of people here in the UK were saying, well, that doesn't quite go far enough, because these allegations have been around for years. There was, Virginia Giuffre, the late Virginia Giuffre, was very vocal about advocating for herself and the other alleged victims. And during all that time, we really hadn't had much from the royal family. It just feels like now, when the pressure is really at a maximum point, when there are some undeniable things that have come out of this release of documents about Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein, about the fact that he lied about not being in contact with him after that meeting he had with him in 2010. Now people are asking questions about what did the wider royal family know about it? What did the late Queen know about it? And these are kind of questions that usually you wouldn't get about the royal family. They are held at such a position of deference normally here in the UK. King Charles getting heckled, really, this is something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. There are calls for them now to be a lot more transparent, because they are an institution that does really avoid scrutiny in many ways. It is part of their appeal, the mystery. But now, really, people are saying, look, there's been clearly some sort of wrongdoing at the heart of the royal family, and we want to know what they knew about Andrew and how much they shielded him.
In terms of public accountability, there will obviously be some questions about what happens here for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. The police say he is in custody, although they haven't named him. And as you mentioned, Keir Starmer saying nobody is above the law this morning, but he wouldn't say whether the former prince should volunteer himself to UK police. Is there a time frame on how long someone can be held in custody, or when we may expect an update from either the government or the Met?
Yeah, so this is the local police at the moment who arrested him. Usually there is a time frame that people can be held without being charged. It does depend on the charge. So for this, we will have to wait and see. And I think the government will probably let the police do their job and not make any statements likely before the police have come out with a charge or not. We have to simply let the legal process play out. But what's quite interesting is that we have heard, yes, the Prime Minister talk about this, but also a number of MPs call on Andrew to volunteer and go speak to the police. Again, something that wouldn't have happened just a few years ago. And of course, there are now calls for Andrew as well to testify in front of the US Congress about what he knew about Jeffrey Epstein. This is something that he said that he would be willing to do. But again, with this release of emails, it becomes clear that the US authorities had made a number of attempts to get Andrew to do this, and they got zero response. And during a recent trip abroad, Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, was actually asked about this, and asked whether Andrew should testify, and he suggested that he should. So this pressure has been mounting around the royal family, around Andrew. And, you know, these allegations, some of them are not new. There had been some suggestions previously, perhaps the police forces may not have allocated as many resources as they could have looking into this, but again, there are certain black and white levels of evidence at the moment that have been released by the US Department of Justice that have led to this arrest. But as I say, there's a number of other allegations and lines of inquiry that the police are looking into. Something as many as 9 different police forces are looking into Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and his actions at the moment. And again, we always have to say that he has in the past denied any allegation of wrongdoing.
Milena, talk to us about the wider political fallout here, as you just briefly mentioned there, because the stability of the royal family is intrinsically linked to the stability of the institution and therefore the stability of the country, and by proxy, I guess, the stability of the government of the day. And so what is the political risk here by either being linked to it by support or by not being swift enough to condemn, as perhaps the public would have liked?
I think the government is trying to be sort of neutral, or not neutral, but perhaps to let the police do their job in this case. But what's quite interesting is that both the government of the day and the royal family have been badly damaged by the latest release of the Epstein emails by the US authorities, and they have dealt with it in very different ways. If you go to the government, it emerged that Keir Starmer's pick for the US ambassador, Peter Mandelson, was deeply involved with Jeffrey Epstein, even after his conviction on sex offences, and it also emerged that Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, knew about this when he appointed him to be the UK ambassador to Washington. And that is a fact that nearly toppled this Prime Minister. He managed to fight for his political survival. He convinced his MPs that, he was lied to, that they should still have confidence in him to be able to lead the country. But this revelation was so seismic that it nearly cost Keir Starmer his political future. Whereas when you look at the royal family, they dealt with it in a more subdued way. Certainly there were a couple of statements, and yes, it expedited the move of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor from his former home in Windsor, the Royal Lodge, a palatial big mansion, to a more modest dwelling in another of the king's estates in Norfolk. But a lot of the people are juxtaposing these different reactions. The government, which was truly shaken up by the revelation between Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein, versus the royal family, who have had a slightly lower profile when it comes to dealing with Andrew's now known links between Jeffrey Epstein and himself. So a lot of people are juxtaposing those two reactions and saying, really, the royal family should go further than this. And this is something that the courtiers really will be thinking about very, very deeply right now, because the royal family is also not used to being questioned to this level of granularity. And they have this famous mantra, never complain, never explain. And that has served them really well for decades, throughout the whole of the reign of the late Queen Elizabeth. In this case, they can't apply that, because the offences that are alleged are so egregious. The whole public persona of Andrew has also been questioned over years. He's done a number of interviews where he came across as you can say, entitled. And all of that, combined with the public pressure, really now means that it's not just Andrew, but also the wider royal establishment that needs to perhaps give some answers.
Milena Veselinovic joining us from London. Thank you very much. We will, of course, stay across this developing story. If you're just joining us, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, formerly Prince Andrew, the younger brother of the British King Charles, has been arrested this morning at around 8 a.m. local time in London on suspicion of misconduct while in public office, relating allegedly to his work as a trade envoy and his links to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Don't miss out, get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.